Today, we're doing our grant orientation. So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the process of applying for a United Way grant. It's just to give a bit of a disclaimer, just to start with, this used to be a really, really complex process. It is still a really, really complex process, but it's dialed back about 30%. So I think in the grand scheme of things, this is still a pretty rigorous application, but we've done our best to streamline things, to just make things easier and more approachable for you as applicants. And also at this point, we are much more in the space of sort of just asking for feedback from you. So as you fill out this application, if you notice, hey, this one section doesn't really seem that important to the programming, but it's taking me so much time, let me know, because I can't promise any changes for this cycle, but just going forward, we want to make sure that we're responsive and that we've got a process that works and makes sense for everyone. So I'll start off with just a brief sort of background about United Way. So if you're not already familiar, United Way, so United Way Worldwide is sort of our international organization, but there are, I think, over 1,200, maybe 1,300 now, local United Ways, and each of those are their own separate 501c3. So we've got our own governing board. So if, United Way Worldwide says, hey, we only want to focus on, maternal health from now on. We can say, hey, actually in Springfield, I don't think that's the only issue that we have, so we're going to continue to focus on what we want to. And that also gives us the flexibility to listen to our community and sort of respond to some emerging needs. So that's who we are. So I'm going to start off with the most boring stuff, and we'll transition and it'll just get more and more exciting as we go. So first off is just eligibility. So there are really sort of a bunch of bullet points here. I think that they're pretty straightforward, but a couple that I just want to highlight. Programs requesting less than $5,000 are ineligible. That's not because we don't think that those programs are worthwhile. It's that we know that this application process and our reporting process is pretty intense, and we don't want someone to, expend more energy as an organization getting the funds than the funds are being put to use for. So it's just an efficiency thing. Also, that religious purposes section, if you are a religious organization, that's totally okay. You can still apply for funds, and we'd love to have you apply. The eligibility piece is really if you are requiring religious participation as a part of that program. So I think that's pretty straightforward. The rest, I think, are pretty self-explanatory. We don't want to, fund organizations that are breaking the law, or or who are just lobbying groups. But if that's all you're doing anyway, the process itself would probably weed you out. But I guess if anyone has any questions about, hey, I'm not quite sure if this program is eligible, just reach out to me, and I'd be happy to help you interpret our policies. Very slightly less boring are the attachments that you all will have to complete in order to sort of submit your application. So the first is a fun one. It's just the ACH form. So that's the form that says, hey, here's how to give us the money if we're awarded the grant. That signed counterterrorism compliance form, it's really just a slip of paper that you sign, saying, hey, we are not violating the Patriot Act. It's pretty straightforward. Also, if you're a nonprofit, that IRS determination letter, we'll need a copy of that. We'll need a list of your board of directors along with the contact information for them. We do have a sort of formatted Excel sheet on our resource center, so it's pretty easy to just sort of fill in the blanks there. We will also require a copy of your bylaws and a copy of your most recent 990 and the most recent audit. 990 is one where there is some flexibility, just because as the size of your organization grows, sort of you grow up to that full 990. But if you're a really small organization and you're not required to have a 990 to begin with, we're not going to require that from you. And we also have a form on that resource center that says, okay, at this size, here's the form that we would require. but we tried to keep it as simple as we could. Really, it's just whatever form you're filling out to the IRS, give us that. And then our financial review team will be able to look at that. And then also, if you're a huge organization and you cover way more than Sangamon and Menard County, we would like to see a sort of statement of your financial position specifically for our area. Then also, if you are operating as the fiscal agent for your grant, so it's not your organization that is applying and then doing, and I guess if you are working with a fiscal agent outside of your organization, we would just want to see a signed letter making sure that, hey, here's how this partnership works. Also, you're not technically required to be a nonprofit to apply for United Way. But if you're not a nonprofit, it gets a little more complicated. So basically just give me a call if you're not a nonprofit and you want to apply. All righty, so we're getting into the actual process itself. So these are all the people who are involved. So one is the Vision Councils. These are the United Way volunteers, experts, people with lived experience in a specific issue area. And these are the ones who are taking that community feedback and creating our strategic investment plans. And they're also the volunteers who are reviewing each and every application and asking questions about them. And they'll also be there for the program interviews. The Community Impact Investments Committee, that is our board committee that oversees the Vision Councils. Really, their role is more about policy and procedure. They're the ones who help design this process and they provide oversight for the Vision Councils. But the Vision Councils are the ones who are deep in the work, who are reading every application and are scoring those applications. A little bit separately is the Financial Review Team. That's another committee of our board. And their role is to sort of separately review all of that documentation that I talked about on that last slide. And really, that's just because we don't expect all of our health experts to also be experts in, reading an organization's 990 and understanding what that means. So it is a separate team that reviews that, and it's not really included in the scoring of your application. It's more of a checklist. Okay, the financial review team sort of looks through and says, okay, everything's hunky dory, or oh, we actually have a couple of red flags. Hey, Vision Council, you might want to know about this red flag that we noticed. Then lastly, we have our board of directors. They are our board here locally. This is the room where they meet. And they are the final approval on just about everything we do here. And then lastly, it's staff, which right now the community impact staff is just me. So feel free to reach out to me at any time. My role in this process is just to be totally transparent, not at all to vote or to sway our volunteers in any way. My job is to just facilitate this process. So if any of you need help sort of crafting your application, I'm never going to tell you what to write, but I'll say, well, I think our volunteers might be interested in X, Y, or Z. So could you talk about that more? Really, my role here is just to be impartial and to make this process as easy and, cross your fingers, fun for everyone. So sort of the timeline of the process. So right now you're at grant orientation. So congrats, you're here. And congrats to anyone online watching this from home. Then really the next step is the applications being submitted. Between now and then, every single Wednesday from 4 to 5, we've got sort of open office hours here at United Way. So feel free to come on in and just ask questions. But I think most of you in the room know me, just call me anytime and I'll be happy to help with whatever questions you got. So those applications are going to be due February 3rd at midnight. They'll be due on EC Impact, and EC Impact is our software where we sort of conduct all of this process from, and I'll do a deep dive into that later. But after those applications are submitted, our Vision Councils take basically a whole month just to review independently. They are reading through every application with a fine-tooth comb and sort of developing their sort of initial thoughts on those applications and developing questions for each of you. So they'll basically, I don't think that we've finalized what exactly that process is going to look like, but at some point in February or March, you're going to get a list of questions from our vision councils, and you can respond to those in writing before our program interviews. Really, the reason that we do that is so that really the program interviews are pretty limited on time just because we have so many applicants. And what we don't want to do is spend that entire time saying, hey, I really didn't understand this piece of your budget, or, you know, what did you mean when you said X, Y, or Z? And then before you know it, that whole interview time is over and we didn't even get the chance to talk about, you know, the awesome work that your programs do. So those program interviews, after we've answered those questions, really, they're pretty straightforward. They're going to be divided in time equally across every single program that applies within each issue area. And it's pretty much just an open dialogue. We'll all get together, whether in person or via Zoom, and just sort of ask questions, and you can ask questions of the vision councils. But the one thing that sort of the stipulation is that try not to bring any visual aids. We just want to make it sort of as an even playing field as possible. And then lastly, if you are applying with another organization, you know, working together on one grant, just be sure to have a representative from each organization at that program interview. So once those interviews are over, we will have sort of our vision council meetings. So they'll meet before the interviews, and then the interviews will happen, and then they'll meet right after the interviews. So I think this year we're going to try to do that all in one day, which we will see how that goes. But honestly, personally, I think it's going to be really good just because it'll all be so fresh. But they'll sort of meet before and after those program interviews, talk to each other about which programs they think are going to make the best investments, talk about, you know, the things that they noticed in the applications, and then make those recommendations in terms of which programs will be funded. Then all of our vision councils will get together and sort of say, okay, well, you know, for example, let's say education has 20 applications and health has 2 applications. You know, what we never want to do is leave dollars sitting on the table that could be going towards a program doing good work. So we'll sort of all talk to each other and make sure that the number at the end of all of this ends up that we are spending as much as we possibly can on the best programs that we can. So they'll get together and talk about that in April or May. Then in the May United Way board meeting, we will approve all the applications. And then just as soon as that happens, we will let you all know that, hey, you got funded, or hey, sorry, let's apply next time. One thing that's actually pretty unique about our investment process is that we have feedback sessions. So whether you are funded or not, you are welcome to sort of after this whole process is over, sit down with the vision councils and talk about, okay, what could I do in my grant in my application next time that would make it a stronger application, and not necessarily just next time for us, but also for other applications that you're putting in. I think it's a pretty useful thing. So I would definitely encourage each of you to utilize those feedback sessions. But let's say you get that beautiful email that says, hey, you got funded. So the first thing that we would do is talk about sort of revising those deliverables. So in your application, basically in the application, you said, okay, we're going to serve 100 clients with $100,000. And let's say, for example, United Way only had $75,000 to give you. We're not going to still expect you to serve those 100 clients at that same level. So really that agreed upon deliverables process is just your chance to say, okay, with the money that United Way is able to provide, here are the outcomes and outputs that we would expect from that. Once we get all that figured out, we'll need 2 signatures on that. So from your board chair and then your executive director. And then if there are any issues or basically anything anyone's feeling super nervous about, you know, we can always modify those funding agreements just to say, hey, this funding is contingent on X, Y, or Z. It's a pretty flexible process. And lastly, just in case you didn't already know, so the way our funding works, we fund in 3-year cycles, but the contracts themselves are only for 1 year at a time. So basically every year you'll sign a very similar contract, and just know that basically each year that funding is contingent on our campaign success, because we can't give out money that we don't have. Looking to the future, I'm very much looking forward to saying, hey, we have even more money than last year. So then we can talk about how to best invest those funds. Also, if you get that sort of, hey, you're being funded message, you get to do reporting, hooray. What you're seeing on the screen here is, I would say, the absolute maximum of what we would provide. Just like we are sort of paring down our application process, we will also be taking a good hard look at our reporting process just to make sure that we're not asking you all for information that we're not going to use, and just making sure that we're not wasting your time reporting when you could be doing the awesome work that all of your agencies do. So there will be reporting of some kind. This is what it currently is. This is what our policies currently say that we will do. But I would say you could almost certainly look forward to at least some changes on those. So now we're going to sort of take a dive into EC Impact. That is our sort of online application portal, and it's also the portal that you'll use to fill out your applications if you are chosen for funding. So the way to find this is to go to springfieldunitedway.org and scroll all the way to the bottom, and you'll see this quick link section and agency EC Impact login. I believe these instructions are also sort of in that, hey, here's how to apply section where you probably found out about this orientation. So you already know right where that is. So if you already have a login, go ahead and sign in. If you don't, you'll hit sort of sign up or create a new account, and it'll ask you for your organization's EIN, and basically it'll autofill. So it'll just automatically plug in your address and things like that. And you just need to put in basically your contact information. It'll ask you sort of which application you're applying for. So whether that be basic needs and financial stability, education, or health. And then it'll give you this pre-qualification form. This is pretty straightforward. It's mostly just asking like, hey, are you a functional organization that is ready to submit an application? For the vast majority of folks, I think the answers are going to be yes across the board. But if for some reason you think your answer might be no to some of these, give me a call and we'll work out how to go forward from there. And then actually, let me go and pull up the site itself just so I can show you some of the things that this looks like. So once you're logged in, this is what your homepage is going to look like. If you already have an EC Impact account, this section right here, apply for a new grant, is the spot that you're going to want to go to. And that's where basically that section will just give you those same options. So, basic needs and financial stability, education, or health. And then once you pick that, it will show up right here and you can fill it out from there. But before we dive into sort of the content, I want to show just a couple of things on EC Impact. So one is historical processes. So if your organization has applied for United Way funding in the past or is currently being funded, you can click on this historical processes and see basically everything that you have ever submitted to United Way. So that can be really helpful in terms of, I don't quite know how to answer that question. How do we answer it in the past? Or if you want to, go grab old documents or see, what was our budget last year? You can just grab it right from there. And then the last thing that I wanted to show was this community fund grant process materials section. This is where you will find all of the guides. Basically everything that's included on that how to apply screen is also included right here. And you'll just sort of go down the list and you can see all these supporting documents that are going to help you fill out your application. I would say one thing to pay special attention to is this program metric form attachment. Let's go ahead and download this here and open it up. So one change this year is that just to start off with, you're not required to sort of go into EC Impact to fill out all of your deliverables. So for this program metric form attachment, basically this is how we're going to ask you about all of your outputs and your outcomes and your average growth measurements, things like that. If you're familiar with our processes before, the formatting of this, it might look a little bit similar, but basically we're asking you for each measurement that you're measuring, which part of our strategic investment plan does that apply to? Is it an outcome, an output, or an average growth measurement? And then what the measurement actually is. So I've got an example over here just so you can see what one that is filled out would look like. And then once you have those, it's just a matter of filling in, hey, what did we do last year? What are we doing this year? And what would we expect in the coming year for these outcomes and outputs? New for this cycle, we've got these two questions. So for every single indicator that you're doing, we're going to ask you how you're measuring it, and then how you're going to define success for that. And that is, yeah, absolutely. Do you have a question?
Can you just tell me like two things? What is what the D word you're using? I'm so sorry, a deliverable, and what is the indicator? I have no idea.
You're totally good. They're synonyms. Basically, things that you will measure to say that your program is working.
Okay.
Yeah, so deliverables, indicators, measurements, it's all sort of, it's all gravy. Basically, what we're talking about are your outcomes and your outputs.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, so really, we're just going to ask you, how are you going to measure it? And what are you calling success? And that is helpful both for us as an organization, reviewing the applications, but also if there's turnover at your organization, that's going to be really helpful for us to say, when that new person starts and is trying to learn how to fill out the United Way forms, we can say, hey, here's how you all defined these terms. So hopefully that will help a little bit in the future. So at the end of basically, once you've completed this form, you'll basically just have a bunch of these sections over and over again, all the way down this list. So right now you can see this one is an outcome because there are because you can see that there are a number served and a number that are achieving. So basically that's your big tell that it's an outcome, is that there's some percentage of your clients that you are doing something for, but it might not have the effect that you want. So you can see here, the form looks ever so slightly different, whether you're talking about an output or an outcome. And really that difference is just these two lines right here. So when you're all said and done, you're going to have a bunch of things that look like this, but filled out, copied and pasted all the way down for each measurement that you're providing. I know that's new. It's a little complex. Does anyone have any questions about this form? Does it make sense? Is it weird?
Makes sense.
Like it's not that weird. Like I guess no. So yeah. So that is that form.
As far as those outputs and outcomes,
Yeah.
we're pulling those directly from the strategic United Way strategic plan.
Exactly. Yep. And I think if we go to, let's see if I can pull this up.
One of the things that we track for kids in our program is avoidance of juvenile delinquent behaviors. So, that's something that we're constantly monitoring is, are they avoiding delinquent behaviors, juvenile justice involvements, things like that.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily one of your outcomes. So are there opportunities for us to put in some of our own stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. So talking about those strategic investment plans. So the spot to find those, if you're just on United Way of Central Illinois website, you click applications available now. And we get to this page and you can see those investment plans right here. So for example, we'll look at the education investment plan and there are these sort of suggested outcomes and outputs. but you are absolutely right that we would love to have, basically, if you have a piece of your program that you want to report sort of extra information on top of these, you can absolutely include that in that spreadsheet. And then in the application, I think there's one question that's like, hey, if you have any indicators that aren't included in these investment plans, just talk about why you included them. So to make a long, probably too long answer short, yes, you can do that. All righty. So then let's see, the grant itself. One thing that I want to note as we go into the grant itself. So let's get back to our homepage and look at the application, which is right here. If you want to add another program, so let's say you're applying for, in this case, it's basic needs and financial stability. If you're applying for 3 programs that are all in those issue areas, you can just add a new program right here. And as you sort of fill out each of these forms, if you're familiar with our process, you can sort of log in here, and then you can type in your responses for each of these questions. I would suggest being a little more thoughtful than this. And then you can save your work and it'll be right there for you. And then the one tricky thing about EC Impact is every single form needs to be marked as completed. It's a bit of a learning curve thing, but basically you can see that it changed from this red color to yellow. Once you have every single one of these forms marked as completed, there will be a big red submit button that pops up here. And basically, if you get to the end of your application, you're like, wait, where do I hit the submit button? It's probably because it's probably not showing up because one of those forms has not been marked as completed. So that's sort of the spot to go from there. Talking a little bit about sort of the content of the application. There is one new question in the application this year, and it's just that you summarize your program in 120 words or less. The rest is all consolidated, so you can sort of go down and see we're asking a lot fewer questions, hopefully more clearly, but basically, if anyone has any questions, feel free to just reach out. The one thing that I will say to take extra note of, I found out as we were creating this process that we have character limits on the questions that we can ask. So when we say, describe this program, what I wanted to say is, here are the bullet points that we're going to look for. So those are just in this green text. So if you hover over this green question mark, that's where you're going to get that. It's also written out in full on that sample application. So if you're using that, it's already all spelled out for you.
And you really do want that one box to be 120 words or less because you gave us 4,000 characters.
Yes, yeah. If it is 121 words, you'll be hearing about it.
Perfect.
Yeah, and for that sort of this longer, hey, describe your program in detail, because our system caps it out at 4,000 characters, we just added an extra question here. So if you run out of room right here, just continue it on that next question. All righty, so that is the application and EC Impact. Does anyone have any questions on any of that? And just know that I'm available anytime. All righty, then next up, we are going to talk about, I'll pull this PowerPoint back up. And we'll go all the way back to where we were. So now we're going to talk a little bit about each of our issue areas. So when you hear United Way talk about our issue areas, those are basic needs, education, financial stability, and health. Within each of those, we've got in our strategic investment plans, the vision statement, which is sort of that big picture, hey, here's what we want to see. And then within that, we have priorities. And then under those are strategies. So what are we actually going to do to make that change happen that we want to see? So I'll start off with basic needs. Probably our most, probably our simplest issue area. And really that's because it has one priority, and that's emergency food and shelter. One thing to note, there is a pretty specific target population here, and that is basically Sangamon and Monroe County residents who are the most vulnerable in our community. So in your application, probably talk about how that client base is the most vulnerable. For each of our issue areas, I'm going to sort of go in and say a couple of things that our vision councils are really looking for. So we are going to require that every single basic needs funded program have a plan for training staff and volunteers on trauma-informed practices. Just because we know that these are the most vulnerable members of our community, we want to make sure that when they go to get help, it's a safe place. It's going to be a responsive place. So in your application, there will be a question about how you are implementing trauma-informed practices. And yeah, really, these are sort of the two strategies for basic needs. So that's emergency food and emergency shelter. Basic needs is the one issue area where you are not technically required to report outcomes, just because we know that if you are hungry, you need food today. Really, I think as you get more into that outcomes, it starts to go over into financial stability. At least the way that we have defined it as a United Way. This is probably the most exciting slide on the whole thing. And this is for those basic needs and financial stability programs. So you probably noticed, if you've already started your application, that there is a combined application for basic needs and financial stability. And that is because this time around, our basic needs and financial stability vision councils are going to be working together. So they'll be able to divide and conquer with their full allocable amount, and they'll basically consider all those programs together. Any program that's addressing either basic needs or financial stability is welcome to talk about what they do in that other issue area. And really the goal with that is to give credit to those basic needs programs that, you know, I think in the past there's been this sort of tension that like, oh, United Way really, you know, we are here to fund basic needs, and those are outputs only, but then we ask for success stories about how these clients' lives have changed. So there's this sort of weird tension there where really going forward, we just want to make sure that if you're a basic needs program, just think about how your program might be able to incorporate outcomes and measure those that are aligning with that financial stability investment plan. Really, the ultimate goal here is to move clients from, you know, being homeless to being housed. And really, I think there will be a lot more scrutiny on that housing piece than there will be on the food piece. But absolutely, if you're a basic needs program and you're not currently measuring outcomes, think about if that's possible for your program, and just know that that is something that our vision counselors are going to consider. So knowing that, let's talk about sort of what are some of those outcomes. So financial stability for United Way is all about providing individuals and families those education, skills, and supports needed to live a financially stable life. So we've got 3 priorities for financial stability, and really those are broken out across the age ranges. So we've got children, making sure that they're equipped to make financially smart decisions. So really for kids, we're looking at employment and financial literacy. For adults, we are looking at housing, employment, and financial literacy. And then finally, in that senior population, employment is less of an issue. So we're really looking at that financial literacy and housing, making sure that seniors can stay in their home for as long as is safe. Just a couple of things to note for sort of our definitions for financial stability. So coaching is any sort of skills-based support that staff is giving to a client. So that's okay, how do you create a budget? Then case management is that follow-up time saying, okay, have you completed a budget? Let's, you know, sort of work on those goals and sort of, I think you could think of coaching as the, how do I do it? And then case management is the, how can we get you to a place where you can do it? Mentoring, on the other hand, is not something that staff would do. That is time spent one-on-one between a trained volunteer and that client. And then one last stipulation I want to talk about, wages for program participants. That's not something that's eligible for United Way funding, and that is specifically for financial stability. So the goal there is that we don't want to fund a program that says, oh, we're going to employ, a bunch of people. And then we look at their reporting and they say, yep, we paid them with United Way money, so they are employed, So really, we want them to have the skills to get employed on their own. So yeah, I think I went through each of these priorities and strategies there. So next up is education. And really, again, we break these down by age. So making sure that we've got kindergarten readiness, on-time achievement. And for us, we typically tend to look at things like third grade readiness or third grade reading and fifth grade math as really sort of key metrics to look at. And then also making sure that kids graduate high school with a plan to succeed, just because we all know that there's a pretty big difference between just getting that diploma and being ready for life after high school. And yeah, so I guess going a little bit deeper there, let's sort of just talk about sort of the stipulations for education. So, and this, if applicable here at the top, is a big one. So currently the Education Data Collaborative is a partnership with United Way and the District 186 school district. It's currently been paused. It's been paused for, I think, about 2 years now. We would love to see that back up and running. And basically the stipulation just says, if we can get that back up and running, we will expect all of our education programs to join in on that. But really, it's a data sharing program that's going to help you measure the success of your students. Our education programs, we're also really going to be looking for parent and community engagement sort of embedded throughout all of these programs. And there will be sort of a specific question on that application asking, okay, how are you embedding these principles into your program? And then lastly, we've got a sort of 10-part ACEs training available on the United Way website. I think most of the education programs in town have already completed that, but if you're sort of newer to this process, go ahead and check those out. If you are funded, we will expect you to sort of complete that ACEs training.
What is that?
Thank you. So ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. It's sort of this is a huge simplification, but you could sort of think of it as the kid version of trauma-informed care.
Sure.
Yeah. Then let's see. So sort of going through each of our priorities and strategies here. For kindergarten readiness, really we're looking at preschool or preschool-like experiences, and then home visiting interventions. Those are sort of the two strategies that we know are really effective in that early childhood space. Once you get to that sort of K through 5 age range, we focus on those, like I mentioned before, third grade reading and fifth grade math, and then also social emotional learning, just making sure that they are becoming well-rounded people as well as academic powerhouses. And then lastly, once we get to high school, we've got academic achievement, SEL again, and then also making sure that they have a plan for life after high school and that they have support to help achieve that plan after high school. I guess, are there any questions about education?
So as far as having a plan for life after high school, with Mentor 2.0, because your Vision Council, funded that through the
venture fund, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously that's starting at freshman year. So we won't be able to show results, maybe even within the funding cycle of the 3-year funding cycle. So is it okay to still have that as an outcome that you're working toward, even though it could be only one class that might reach the eventual outcome phase?
If it were me applying, I would probably say in your narrative, say, hey, we will eventually track this. based on just how the program is structured, it doesn't make sense for us to track this in the first year or two. But by year 3 of this grant, we expect to add this outcome. Or any other questions around education? All right, then our last issue area is health. This is all about activating and inspiring our community to get healthy and stay healthy. So we want to make sure that people are, the buzzword that we talk about is health activated. Really, we just want people to be connected to the healthcare world, to trust their providers, things like that. We also need folks to have access to mental health services. So, and that's just because we know that that underpins all the rest of our issue areas. It's so hard to have, you know, a solid education, to be financially stable, to meet your basic needs if your mental health is not in check. And then lastly, we do have a third priority in health that has never been a funded one before. Excuse me. And really that is all about mental health advocacy. So if anyone wanted to provide an application saying, hey, we are going to bring all of the mental health providers in Springfield or Sangamon and Menard County together to sort of work in a more coordinated way, that is definitely something United Way would be interested in funding. So talk to me about that. But really, I think the bread and butter of our health work is this strategy, or this priority 1. And really we've got two strategies that we use to implement that. So one is community health worker services. So just basically people that are embedded in the community, that are bringing folks to their doctor's appointments, who are helping them sort of engage with the system, who are addressing their social determinants of health, things like that. And then the other strategy would be engaging stakeholders. So, you know, for example, going into sort of the taxi services or barbershops, where there are these people embedded in the community that are already trusted, and giving them the tools to help their clients navigate the resources that exist in our community. And then honestly, I think priority 2 is about as straightforward as it gets. We want people to have mental health services. So if your program helps people access mental health services, that's something we would be interested in funding. And then lastly, this is that development of a community-wide system of care around mental health. And I don't think that there are any issue area stipulations around health. So this is my last slide. These are sort of, I think if you're familiar with the old application process, this is sort of the quick and dirty, hey, here's what's different. So basic needs and financial stability are now one application that's going to be considered all together. We removed sort of the pre-approval process. So basically anyone who is listening to me right now can just log on and start their application. We shortened the application. I think it went from like 10 or 11 pages down to 6. So, you know, I think it's still pretty thorough, but hopefully it will be easier to fill out. We also cut down on any extra documentation than we had. In the past, we had, you know, this big, long narrative response checklist where basically we said, okay, well, we're asking these 20 questions, but here's the 100 questions that we really meant. And we've really tried to just say what we mean in those questions to begin with. And then also, if you are sort of, if you really like that sort of checklist mindset so that you can make sure that you have everything covered, go ahead and take a look at that scoring rubric. And I think that's going to be a good guide for you there. One thing to note, just a general piece of advice that I don't think it really fits in here anywhere. A best practice is to, once you've completed your application, give it to someone who is not familiar with your program and just say, hey, as a person who is new to this, does everything in here make sense? Just because our volunteers may not have ever heard of your specific program before. So I think it's just a really good exercise to have someone else take a look at it and give feedback there. Let's see, other things that are new. We've got that new sort of that Excel sheet that we went over earlier to report your measurables or your indicators or your measurements or whatever we feel like using for it that day. But we've got that new form to report your outputs and your outcomes. new for this year, budgets can now be in your own formatting. So if you're used to the United Way budget style, feel free. We've got the form still on there, but it's not a required form anymore. If you have a budget that has basically what you did last year, what you're doing this year, and what you will do in the proposed grant year, feel free to just give us that. Basically, we don't want to spend all of your time, reformatting the documentation that you already have just to fit sort of this formatting that we're not even necessarily super crazy about to begin with, and then lastly, now the entire process is just a little bit shorter. I think last time we did this, applications were due on New Year's Eve. So I think we ruined some people's Christmas, and we're not trying to do that again. So yeah, those are sort of, I think, the biggest changes. That's the end of what I have. So does anyone have any questions or